Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Michael Brown toku ingoa. At the Alexander Turnbull Library, the Archive of New Zealand Music's holdings of popular music have grown considerably in recent years. This includes collecting the tape archives of labels such as Viking and Flying Nun Records, and the collections of artists such as Chris Knox. One of our aims has been to preserve the masters of important music releases. Another has been to collect other types of recordings that document the processes that popular music goes through before the final product is released. The demos, multitracks, outtakes, and mixes that precede it. This paper concerns the Disaster Radio Project, a recent pilot looking at contemporary popular music created on digital audio workstation software. For this pilot, we've collaborated with New Zealand artist Luke Rowell in archiving 2 of his LPs. The project addresses the reality that while music production once involved physical media such as magnetic tape, for the last 25 years it has largely shifted to the digital domain. While preserving the final release remains relatively straightforward, trying to document the creative processes which artists now employ in digital production is far more challenging. We're going to begin with some background about Luke's music, then look at Digital Audio Workstation, or DAW software, and the archival challenges it presents. The paper will then cover the approaches the library and Luke have taken and the resulting collection. Born in 1983 and raised in Lower Hutt, Luke Rowell is one of New Zealand's foremost synth-pop and vaporwave musicians. Over the last 20 years, he's released 15 albums and performed hundreds of gigs around the world, as well as undertaking freelance soundtrack and animation work. His 2010 synth-pop track, Gravy Rainbow, released as Disaster Radio, was a YouTube hit with over 1 million views and counting, while his albums as Eyeliner are considered among the essential works of the vaporwave movement. Music writer Martin Pepperell notes that Luke, quote, grew up in a family with interests that met at the intersection of art and technology. Adopting computer-based music tools at an early age, he exemplifies new generations of artists whose practice is fully born digital. His first albums were composed using the tracker sequencer program Jascola Buzz. Around 10 years ago, when Buzz ceased being actively supported, Luke switched to using the Steinberg Nuendo DAW as his central creative tool. Since the dawn of non-linear audio editing in the late 1980s, digital audio workstations such as Nuendo, Pro Tools, and Logic Pro have become central to music production. GarageBand, an app that's bundled with Apple devices, is a DAW that many people will be familiar with. These apps streamline and extend techniques first developed in recording studios, such as multi-track recordings, tape editing, sound mixing, and signal processing. They also offer entirely new tools relating to digital sampling, sequencing, and sound synthesis. Why would we want to archive DAW productions? Research libraries such as the Turnbull have traditionally sought to collect material which helps us understand music as a creative process. Such sources might include manuscript scores and sketches, live recordings, studio tapes, all of which help trace the genesis and progress of a musical work. The files generated by DAWs are the digital equivalent of the music archives have previously collected in analog form. And if we don't preserve this material, we inadvertently create a born digital void around how most music is now created. The complexity of DAW applications and the general risks pertaining to digital material present major challenges, however. And the objective of the Disaster Radio project has been to develop sustainable workarounds to archive the information contained in Luke's productions. We hope that this research might also prove useful to other artists who want to secure long-term access to the digital componentry of their music.
Kia ora koutou katoa. Ko Valerie Love toku ingoa. My name is Valerie Love, and I am Senior Digital Archivist and a Curator at the Alexander Turnbull Library. So, as Michael has outlined, the Luke Rowell collection was a natural fit for ATL's collections from a curatorial point of view. However, from a digital archivist point of view, it posed an array of digital preservation challenges in terms of how we could continue to provide meaningful future access to this content. So one of the key challenges of digital preservation is technical obsolescence. As Ricardo Ferrante writes, born digital objects require particular hardware and operating systems in order to be accessed and rendered with integrity. As technology evolves, parts of these technical environments are replaced with newer, faster, smaller components. The hardware and software necessary for a 10-year-old object to operate as designed is often no longer readily available. Neither is the skill set required to maintain that environment. Innovation in the marketplace is itself a risk to the cultural heritage it produces. While standard audio files such as WAV or MP3 are currently deemed relatively low preservation risk, DAWs are another story entirely. When audio is loaded and manipulated in a DAW, all decisions are stored in a project file. And this file records transformations, editing points, mixing, and EQ adjustments, which are made in relation to audio assets and/or coded sequences. And the integrity of the production is thus dependent on both the project file and the source files. Adding further complexity are plugins, third-party components that extend the DAW's functionality to include audio effects, such as reverb, compression, delay, or virtual instruments and sound libraries. So a single track may incorporate a dozen or more plugins. Moreover, most DAWs are proprietary applications, each using its own project file, which may lack interoperability with other DAWs. So there are real challenges to ensure that a DAW session created in 2021 can still be accessed in 10 or 20 years, let alone 50 or 100. There are 4 common digital preservation strategies. To maintain the original technical environment, the hardware, software, and plugins needed to render the material, to replace the original software with backwards compatible applications, emulation or the creation of a virtual version of a suitable environment which retains the look and functionality of the original, or migration to convert digital content into a new format that can continue to be accessed with changes in technology. For this particular collection, the first 3 options were deemed impractical by the library, especially given the different promulgations of DAWs, plugins, operating systems, and hardware that would be needed to maintain, replace, or emulate. And so that left us with migration as an option, but this in itself was no simple task. It's worth mentioning that this exact problem has been recognized in the music industry more widely. And artists have reported losing access to older DAW projects. And this loss of operability highlights another benefit of finding ways to preserve these projects to allow such an iterative creative process to continue. Several industry solutions have also emerged to secure ongoing access to DAW session information over time. Most notably, the exporting of edited data in combination with audio assets as an open media framework, OMF, or as advanced authoring format, AAF, file formats. And these file formats allow projects to be opened on different DAWs and is a form of migration in and of itself. However, migration to a highly complex format such as AAF still poses significant long-term risks from an access perspective. So that brings us to where we met Luke on Twitter, as it turned out. The Turnbull Library announced that the Flying Nun record donation of its master tape library in 2018, and Luke got in touch with us asking how the library was preserving DAW project files. And the short answer was that we weren't, but it was fortuitous timing. Having an artist keen to engage with the library gave us an opportunity to develop a proposal to archive 2 of Luke's albums as a pilot and see what we could learn from the process. The 2 albums chosen were the 2007 disaster radio album Visions, which was created on Jescola Buzz, and the 2015 Eyeliner album By Now, created on Nuendo. But our first discovery, as it turned out, was that the Visions Buzz could no longer be opened properly, a mere 13 years after they were created. So we swapped in another Nuendo album, which is 2010's Charisma. Our solution to the DAW project issue has been a form of collaborative migration in which the artist, with his unique expertise and knowledge of the content, has completed the work of the migration process. And following this, Luke created a package of production components for each album track. While the collection originally contained an array of file formats, many of which posed real challenges for long-term preservation and access, the files agreed upon for retention are more stable file formats. So if a Nuendo project file, or NPR, is the native digital object, then we have found alternative ways for the information it contains to be expressed. Some of these alternative expressions are familiar and straightforward, for instance, exporting individual tracks within the track mix as individual files or stems, and this is something musicians will already be familiar with. These audio stems are readily preservable as digital objects and can be imported into any DAW for research and remixing. The project package for each track is standardized across the entire collection. This package includes multiple ways for researchers to investigate the nuts and bolts of Luke's music. Spreadsheets feature technical data about every stem, cross-referenced to other assets in the collection, and screenshots show the settings for every plugin used for every stem. Luke has also created screencasts of the Nuendo project for every track, in which he gives a guided tour, disclosing his secrets and documenting the user experience of a digital audio workstation for future researchers. As a form of migration for digital preservation, the approach is new for the library. Traditionally, digital preservation staff would manage the migration project following the receipt of the original files, creating access copies in stable formats. The Disaster Radio project deviates from archival orthodoxy, with migration being undertaken prior to transfer and by the donor himself, as the person best placed to understand his setup and accomplish the task efficiently.
Using the methodology that Val has just outlined, we completed work on the 2015 By Now LP, and this has been made available through the National Library website. The Luke Rowell collection is open access and can thus be researched from anywhere in the world. Luke has generously made much of the material available for online download as well, under a Creative Commons license. This means that anybody can remix, resample, mash up, and rearrange the music, and even upload the results. We see this as having great potential for users, whether teachers giving classes on digital music, students with remix assignments, musicians wanting to try new arrangements, researchers studying electronic dance music history, or anybody just plain curious about this music. When we were planning the release of this collection in 2021, we also thought it would be fun to help people understand its possibilities by inviting other artists to contribute to a remix album based on the collection. They included musicians from Europe, Wales, United States, and New Zealand. And this album, Free By Now Remixes, was simultaneously launched on Bandcamp as a free download itself. We also published a blog which provided further examples of reuse possible with this collection. These include importing MIDI files into score writer programs and exporting it as sheet music, or getting a bit more fringe, ingesting MIDI into a visualization engine such as MIDIJam and creating your own music videos. The latest news is that we have almost completed ingest and description of the Charisma album. And although we planned to finalize this last year, COVID intervened somewhat. And as it happened, the Nuendo projects proved slightly more complicated for Luke to archive. But this part of the collection will soon be available, followed by some more reflection from us on the overall pilot. So for now, have fun exploring and reusing the Luke Rowell digital music collection, and check out the free remix album for some free inspiration. Finally, we'd like to also acknowledge the wider project team and artists who contributed to this work. And we'll leave you with a taste of Pinot Noir, one of the tracks from By Now. Ngā mihi nui.
we go. Okay, so I'm here talking to Michael Brown and Valerie Love, who you've just listened to. I'm Tim Hart from Auckland Museum, Director of Public Experience, and we're going to chat a little bit about the paper that we've just watched. So we've had a little bit of a chat beforehand to get to know each other, and something that came up is, you know, this work is particularly sort of enabled by Luke and his partnership with the team. So, Michael, Valerie, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'll start off. It's very much dependent on quite a close collaborative process, this project. That's right, Tim. And I think that has worked really well as a pilot in the context of it being a pilot project, something we've never done before, and just seeing how it plays out and giving us some broader lessons about how we can do this in future, how that would work, what to plan for in future, and also the degree to which we will continue to collect in this way.
Right. Yeah. So, yeah, I was just really struck by how sort of deep you dived into the work, and that capturing the creative process was fantastic. I wonder how you would do that in a less tight partnership in a way. And we quickly talked a little bit about copyright and access and things. Valerie, how do you see that playing out with future sort of work?
Yeah, I think we were really quite well placed that Luke was so keen to be involved and was so active in the project. I think it would have been a completely different project without him really taking that initiative and working so closely with us. Scale is something that that was one of my concerns in this project, because, there's so much music produced out there that, it could really quickly just expand. And even like just with Luke's portfolio, I mean, there's so much to choose from. So even just sort of picking the 2 albums to start with was a bit of a challenge. But I think it just really has been great to sort of have this sort of experimental project to see what we were able to preserve, what types of things we really struggled to preserve, and how we could then work to make these materials accessible into the future.
Yeah, yeah. Michael, you mentioned the sort of Flying Nun archive. Did that come as what? Is that master LPs as well as master tapes?
The Flying Nun catalogue, the library already had the LPs and the cassettes and CDs that have been released publicly over the years.
Yeah.
The archive that came in 2018 was of the master tapes for those releases, as well as the studio multi-tracks for many of them, and a lot of other unpublished material, the kind of rough mixes and live tapes that sort of feed into final release. So quite a large and complicated collection in its own right, but a whole different set of issues to do with analog technological obsolescence, getting machines to play these tapes back, making sure you've got all the settings right when you do that, trying to source sort of obscure Dolby decoder modules and the like.
And taking the highest quality digital facsimile you can, I guess.
That's right, and which then in effect becomes the new master. For that material, because into the future it's going to be less and less easy to access that original tape.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think there's some sort of date where a huge amount of tape is going to sort of fall off a cliff from a fidelity point of view. Yeah, I worry about that with my own collection. Yeah. And Valerie, that sort of archive, I mean, I guess because Flying Nun's still going, I guess you can work with them on that. So that really helps, I guess, in a way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think that looking at both the project with Luke and the project with Flying Nun, that is actually a really important issue, because when when a collection becomes separated from its provenance, if you like, and you don't have people around to explain the technical side of how a collection or an item was created, you then have to start to deduce things. And it could have been that Luke donated this collection and we had to try and work it out for ourselves, which just would have been a lot of assumptions we would have had to have made, and guesswork along the way. So working very closely with the creators or the donors of this material is the ideal situation to be in.
And I guess particularly in a medium where there's so much remixing and bringing in material, that creative side of it would be, I think, greatly diminished if you didn't actually have the person who did it.
Yeah, that's exactly right, because migration of materials into more contemporary or more stable formats is quite a common thing in digital preservation. But if you're migrating, for example, a Microsoft Word document into a PDF or another format, it's really easy to say, okay, the integrity of the information is still there. But when something is somebody's artistic work, it's, there's so many nuances and subtleties of their output that, I might think, okay, this sounds pretty much the same. And the artist might listen to it and say, oh my gosh, what have you done?
Yeah. No, that's great. That's a really good point. Okay, well, look, I think we might leave it there. I think we've probably got to our time. So, look, thank you very much. And I'm sure there'll be a lively discussion after the paper next week. So thank you both very much.
Great. Thank you, Tim.
Thanks, Tim.